session. I thought it was Tuesday. No, or Thursday. Now it's Tuesday. I'm losing track of the days. It's coronavirus land, but it is Thursday, 1:00 Eastern time. And we are giving you another MSP initiative blast today. Our friend and speaker is Jameson West. I've ran into Jameson in all sorts of different parts of the world on different trips, which there's plenty of stories that come from that. But welcome to the show, Jameson. How's everything going?
Good. Yeah, it's a nice, maybe a little bit of a heat warning today, about 107 degrees here in Las Vegas today, but pleasant in the pool anyway.
Of course. Yeah. So, why don't you start off with, you have quite a background, right? I mean, you've had a couple different stops along the professional journey. Why don't you give everybody your background and how we get to today?
Yeah, I'll make a long story as short as I can. So, 21 years, owned an MSP in Seattle, and did a few acquisitions and then sold in 2016. So that was my MSP life. And I co-founded at the time, I helped co-found Smileback, but it wasn't too operationally involved. Helped co-found Smileback and another company called Teamatics. I've since divested myself of Teamatics, and with Brad Benner, who was another co-founder at Smileback, we also co-founded another company, TimeZest. So currently I'm a CEO of both Smileback and TimeZest. Which has been both companies are doing well. TimeZest, Smileback 5 years, TimeZest 1 year, so very different timelines, and really both very exciting. TimeZest is kind of exploding right now out of the gates, which is a lot of fun. Over the last few years, I used kind of more specific to our conversation today, thinking about strategy, vision, leadership. I leveraged a system called Scaling Up in my MSP. I've been an EO for 7-8 years. Vern Harnish was the founder of EO. He wrote Rockefeller Habits, and I leveraged his stuff to manage my MSP. And the EOS was really taking off as the hot topic about the time I sold. Gino Wickman wrote a few other books supporting that system. He was the founding member of EO Detroit. And so they're both EO kind of competitive operating systems for your business. But I felt EOS was way more focused on the entrepreneur. So I used it in my companies, in the software companies. We use it Smileback and TimeZest. But I also started helping other companies do it. So my latest venture is ConnectStrat, where we have a group of coaches, strategic coaches, focused primarily on EOS, but we're also doing strategy work, life plan work, and leadership coaching, and that ventures. We're super excited. It's a great year to be getting into it, and kind of key to our topic today.
Yeah. So it is that's an awesome background, by the way, and you've definitely consolidated it because there's a lot of little stories in between all of those. So you obviously consult with a lot of people, and obviously you have the multiple different companies, and obviously you help people consult on the whole scaling of business and like streamlining operations. And we've both been in a lot of, in behind the doors and a lot of MSPs asking the hard questions. So talk to us about what your view of how things were running from, the market standpoint before January and from January until now. And then we'll go into what does the rest of the year look like. So let's just like kind of go in order.
Yeah. So I think it was interesting before coronavirus. My perspective now is in the software side, vendor side, everything was kind of steady as she goes, right? I mean, it hadn't. You kind of look back after an event like we've just gone through and say, wow, our ups and downs in the last 4 or 5 years, ups and downs were relatively predictable and flat. Mm-hmm. And that's gone completely out the window. So I would say the outlook was fairly positive. People were figuring out how to differentiate, how to individuals, how to increase multiples. The focus was like everybody's on this kind of planar trajectory where people are trying to, what's the, like, how do they differentiate in the market? How is technology slowly iterating towards like, where do we need to start thinking about security and cloud and just all these like micro adjustments to it. That's not a statement across everybody. There's exceptions, absolutely. But in general, that was the tenor of my conversation. So it didn't feel significantly different. Obviously, since coronavirus hit, there's been a wave of crazy. March was, I think that immediate impact and fear as the tidal wave started to come in. We saw, I think, vendors across everywhere kind of took an initial, and I assume BVoIP would be similar, not as bad as everybody fretted about, but the MSPs who were initially like reactive, cut out 1 or 2 week reaction. And now we've kind of gotten into this moderately stable point. I'm super interested to talk more about that and get your thoughts on this as well. But this moderately like, okay, everybody's got a couple months under their belt this and trying to things look like today. Yeah, it's interesting. But we've seen companies really do one of 3 things over the last couple months. Either, and it hasn't been too many, they've made the poor decision of making rash kind of non-informed decisions based on panic. So there's been a handful of those, and I feel bad for the folks who are in those situations. But there hasn't been very much of it, which is good to see. But a lot of people just been heads down, just executing and trying to figure it out and tactically adjusting, and can't get their head above water. Take a moment and said, how do I leverage all this crazy unpredictability to do something different and better? So I talk to leaders, I talk to leadership teams, and I find they fall in one of those buckets. And it's been interesting. Right now I'm feeling like the tenor of what I'm hearing is relatively stable, maybe not as pessimistic as I thought we'd be at this point. I'm also on the ConnectWise Advisory Council, for example. So I get a chance to hear, we get together fairly frequently these days just to kind of hear the full gamut of global, Australia, UK, United States, all North America. How are people? And you get some variance. It's a message that what I hear from my my strategic clients as well.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So I'm sure there absolutely was, a bunch of people who made rash just changes, probably echoes of, 2008 maybe still in their mind, and everybody was quick to make a move. And I'm sure everybody was rushing to try and figure out, especially here in the US, whether they could get access to these emergency, government funding programs. So, let's talk about what you see between now and the end of the year, right? Because like at this point, everyone has re-pivoted, right? They said, all right, we're in it. We're hopefully coming out of it. Different parts of the country, and obviously in the world are on different tracks to reopening and whatever it is. So what is your best advice to, whether it's somebody in the software business, whether it's MSPs, what's your best advice strategically to like keep a handle on the, let's not go drastically change our mode, or maybe they should. I guess it's obviously company by company dependent.
I don't think the answer is don't dramatically change. I think it does depend on the business and the strategy. So there's a couple. The first thing that I would say is I don't think anybody really knows, right? There's a lot of fear. Like what is, and when there's a lot of fear, it creates uncertainty, but there's profitability uncertainty, right? So you got to figure out your way. So that's a big message. When we see wealth is made and lost in massive times of economic turmoil, right? That's clear. The market drops, people panic and sell at the bottom of the market unless they can take a deep breath and realize that that's when they're supposed to buy. And then you just see this differentiation in mentality, and people make really poor emotional decisions, or they step back and they create a strategy for how to leverage the situation and come out the other end better. So that's one thing I would say. I fear right now that we're propping up the economy in the United States, especially is what I'm most informed on, through PPP and idle, PPP grants and loans and idle loans. And it's there is definitely concerns that, there's some propping up of the economy, that when those grants expire, which we're not far away from, unless the rules change again, which they might. So there's the uncertainty, that all we've done is delayed the possibly inevitable. We don't know, but my first thing that I'm talking to leadership teams about is not to be cavalier about the cash or the grants that they're seeing. There's a handful of companies we're seeing take, this is a grant, it's automatic, it's all going to happen. They're not reading all the T's and C's. Imagine all my clients are going to stay. This is just like going to my bottom line. Well, guess what? I'd really caution people to think twice on that. For folks, what I'm seeing is a lot of businesses, especially MSPs, who are not overly negative affected. They've maybe lost their professional services and some product, but they're keeping their MRR mostly. I mean, that's a rough average of what I'm seeing. And so they're not getting crushed, but instead of taking all of those government dollars and putting them in a bank account for a potential rainy day or when something does happen, they're leveraging it today, which is great. They're being strategic. But if something bad happens, they've left themselves in a poor cash position. So the very first thing I would say is cash. Go back to that mantra that was there before this ever happened. Cash is king. Be smart about cash. A healthy balance sheet is going to be the most important weapon you have against uncertainty going into fall. If you have a strong balance sheet, you can weather things. Those without a strong balance sheet.
Hey, Jameson, do me a favor. Can you stop and then come back in? Your audio quality crash.
Did it get choppy?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, that's better.
Here, give me just a second. Is it better now?
Yeah, it is a little bit.
I never know. I'm getting a new computer. Probably better.
All right. So, you're saying cash flow is king, 100% agree. You're saying balance sheet's king, 100% agree. There's this uncomfortableness now, though, because a lot of these people, especially in the services business, the majority of their expense is payroll. There's a personnel question now, right?
Yeah. So it's been interesting to have conversations with folks who are like, yes, if you are moderately if you're where you need to be from a KPI and financial perspective, and you can keep your people busy and billable and all of those things, if you're maintaining your business in the correct way and you can keep your people great, that's the whole point of PPP. That's the whole point of idle. Let's do it. However, if there is, and there's a difference for non-essential businesses that are shut down or going to get, like a restaurant shut down, going to reopen, but they keep their people employed during the shutdown, which is really more directly to the point of PPP. But for an MSP who's not shut down, they've been running, maybe they've lost 20% of their business and they're keeping people employed with those funds where that business is not going to come back, and they're just draining their cash resources. That's a very dangerous decision they're making. That's I would caution people to not run their business correctly just because of these potential additional funds they have. And I think I lost you there. George, either I've fallen out or George has fallen out.
Looks like it may be George. Sorry, everyone.
Okay. That's all right. He'll come back. He said I was sounding shaky, but I could see his video stopping. copy.
Yeah.
I think he may have had a little bit of an internet problem. We'll give him a second,
Possible.
or I'll just keep talking.
Nope, I'm back. All right. So that being said, I heard everything you said, so no worries. So that being said, moving into the rest of this year, do you change your business model up? Do you decide to do things that you didn't do before? Do you lax on maybe going outside of your comfort zone? Like, there's a lot of things MSPs tend to try and stay away from, right? Like traditionally, and maybe now they got to pivot and maybe go the other way, and it makes it a little more dirty in terms of figuring out how to bring more revenue in.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. So this is where I think the answer is going to be a little unique to the organization, right? So not every MSP is built the same. So I'm going to be curious. I will go back every single time and say that this is when people need to go back and focus on their vision, right? Which by that, yes, the core values that never move aside. But vision in terms of two things: where are we going, and what's our purpose? So it's like what's our endpoint? What do we do? What's our endpoint? And what is our purpose? Why are we here? And if you can leverage new modes of operation that don't skew you so far outside into risky, shiny objects, because you're never going to hear me be a proponent of something that takes you out of your core competencies and purpose. And people make big mistakes and go way outside. I have a client that I do a lot of leadership consulting for. They're not in the MSP industry, but this is a good example. They're in the LED lighting industry. Now, primarily what they do is they source components from overseas, they bring them in and they resell them. So they're primarily a distributor, although they have a lot of expertise. Now, in the midst of all this, they found, that there was a lot of PPE and other things that they could bring in, masks and the like, and their revenue in Q2 far surpassed any expectation out there, but it was within their core competency and right? Their people do something like that. Like they were something. What I think gets more interesting in the MSP world is we've seen, for example, all right, everybody's working from home. This talk, you may have heard me give talks on why we moved our Tyrion to cloud-focused services 7-8 years ago. But people have been sitting around talking about this for a long, long time and haven't really done it. Watch how quickly organizations have said, well, the Band-Aid's been ripped off. Let's pivot and do this. So I've had multiple conversations with MSPs who have made significant decisions enforced on them a bit by coronavirus and work from home, but now they've become the mantra for how they're going to move forward, right? Like we're now serverless. We're no longer selling servers. We don't expect all of our clients are going to go back to the office. So I'm going to go back to the three types of businesses I talked about. There's the businesses who panicked, don't know what to do, don't know how to do cloud services, were unprepared, and they're freaking out. Very few. There's a lot that are putting their heads down and they're making this happen, right? They're reactive. I'm setting up VPNs for people who are going home or whatever, but they haven't really thought strategies around what they're going to do going forward. And then there's that final group who are like, let's leverage this newfound demand, our internal expertise, the work we're doing today, and cloud and security are the two that I'm keep elevating right to the top and saying, if we weren't focused on that before, we sure are now, right? And I've also seen people go back and look at their deepest issues in the organization and realize that they may have some staying healthy, they may have some financial resources to do something about that. I'll give you an example of another leadership client that I work with. They've really had struggles getting a couple of key people into the right seats. Really hiring some executives within the organization, right? Getting the best people. Hey, there's no time like the present, but there's a lot of people looking for them. But there's a lot of talent out there, right? It's like we've just stirred the pot of employees. There's a whole lot out there. Some of them aren't back to work yet, it's a good time. for people who are hiring. So we doubled. We said, well, wait, if we had money in an economic downturn to invest, what we invested in, if it was a huge amount of money, maybe we'd start another business or do something crazy. It was relatively moderate for this particular client. Well, let's go in and double or triple our recruiting budget for our executive leadership team and leverage this pool. Like, there's where we're going to invest our extra funds, is to actually bring in the best people to take us out of the situation, right? And it's brilliant. It's there's forethought involved. They knew it. They were leveraging their own internal processes and strategy and looking at their balance sheet and cash flow and how to mitigate their biggest issues to have the best possible outcome.
That's very interesting. So a lot of people say that during this time, they went back and looked internally and said, hey, here's the things that we always said we were going to do, but didn't. Here's the things that we needed to clean up with, and now's the perfect time to do it. We're sitting here, ticket volume's kind of low. What's your opinion on, and again, you've been through this, right? You bought a bunch of companies, you sold, like you were doing, SharePoint and servers in Microsoft and Azure and all that back in like 2011 and 12 and 13, way ahead of the game. So like, what's the current like climate right now for merging and partnering and acquisitions? Like, what's that whole feel like right now from your opinion?
So that moved really quickly into another topic, which gets super interesting.
I know. I'm gonna throw
that's a good one. So first of all, I'm gonna go back to the beginning. You talked about ticket volume, how people are doing work. Two comments that would come to mind. First of all, what we saw, both Smile Back and TimesUs, we could see it kind of right in front of our faces, is that ticket volume temporarily spiked to like double with no additional revenue to support it, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's going home, it was like, okay, most of that's been, it feels, I think, anecdotally, maybe a little bit, that's flattened out. Ticket volumes at, or maybe even a little lower than it was pre-COVID now, right? Mm-hmm. So you're in about good. I just wanted to see if you were kind of hearing the same things there. So as long keeping people busy, doing other projects, kind of getting caught up normally, great. Leverage strategy. If you're an EOS company, what are your rocks? How do you elevate the staff to work on things that are going to differentiate your business, as opposed to busy work projects? Like, do what's important. Don't just keep yourself busy, and make sure that you have the revenue to keep those people doing what they're doing. Run as a smart business. Don't take those PPP and idle funds and just keep people employed when there's no potential business for them in the future, and then let them go when you run out of money. You're not doing anybody any favors. You have to be really careful about that. Run a smart business.
To that point, a lot of people have said better to give people a gracious exit than an abrupt one, because you didn't do it until the end, right?
Yeah, and you're hurting your business. I mean, you're damaging your business, which hurts all your other employees and their families. You got to be really attentive to, like, you can't just stop being a smart business owner, right? You can't. Now, flip gears into kind of M&A for a minute. Just like there's some availability out there for key leadership and great staff, I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg now, but I suspect it's going to become quite interesting in the second half of this year. We're going to see some MSPs who are very disruptive right now because they're focused on a vertical that was hit harder than others, or some that were just not, or didn't leverage these funds in place and lost all their professional services and products, and they didn't have the balance sheet to recover. I suspect there's going to be some deals on the table in fairly short order over the next few months. I think there's going to be some pretty interesting deals on the table. I also suspect that, you and I are in the vendor business. This is a domino, right? It starts with small businesses in general. At some point, even though it hasn't been a very big wave, it was a ripple. At some point, if they're heavily impacted, it hits the IT services community. And then you and I are the domino after that, right? So once the MSPs get hit, it's starting out. I do have the other IT service providers they're not going away, because it, like, outsourcing and leveraging people to optimize your business is going to come de facto, right? So there's this really interesting conversation, like, is the MSP community trouble in massive permanent trouble, or is this are they going to explode? And and you can hear really smart people on both sides. I think my personal opinion is they're both a little bit right, which is, I think that there's a bigger wave. The second wave is going to be a little worse than the first one, but long term, I think that, outsourcing what you do long term. I'm just sort of the second half of this year together.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that like, is it, it could be termed as the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer kind of thing. I hate to use that analogy, but I feel like it fits very well here. I mean, when COVID originally hit, I saw a lot of people were like, hey, I'm selling my business. Who's out there, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, well, wait a minute. You should, like, were you in a bad shape before this? And now all of a sudden, like, you just can't do it anymore? Or did you give up? And then you got the big guys who are saying, like, like on the completely other end of the spectrum, I'm talking about like the VC or PE backed MSPs that we're already acquiring are like, oh yeah, we've taken our 3-year timetable down to 1 year. And you're like, really? Like, you know how hard it is to go through these transactions and make them smooth and end up on the other side. Well, yeah, that seems like a very truncated timeline, but I guess it's the difference between buying and selling market, I guess. It's just very intriguing to me. Like, I'm one of those guys, and I'm interested to hear your opinion on this. Like, everything's cyclical. I know that that's cliche, but everything's cyclical. You get the small guys who go away, and then you get guys who are with other companies saying, I'm going to go out on my own. And then all of a sudden there's one. Like, it's this rotating thing, right? So like that bottom 15, 20%, I mean, it's just always in flux.
Yeah, it'll be there. It'll always be there. It just creates more opportunities for I mean, M&As will never stop, right? But we do see industries consolidate. And I think but it changes maybe the percentages in each of those buckets, how many little ones, how many mid-size, those percentages will start to shift to larger, but it'll never go away. And because it is cyclical. But I think it all comes, again, you circle back to the beginning of the conversation. It all goes back to, when you say rich, the rich getting richer, what goes to my mind is that's not all about size. That's about your balance sheet health. Like, if you have if this second half, if you're a smart business owner, you could have a tiny MSP and be cash rich. Whether if you run your business intelligently and you put the right strategy, you can come out of the back end and go into 2021 or whenever we get through this mess, who knows? And you can be in a place that demands a better multiple if you have the wherewithal to get through this, right?
What's been your recommendation to people who you're kind of consulting with strategically? Is now a time to go out there and borrow money? I mean, interest rates pretty low. Should you start, if you're in a good cash position now, should they be stocking up for what comes out on the other side?
So I will put a little asterisk here and say there's T's and C's on like PPP and idle that you want to pay attention to, that you want to be, like, you can't do a lot of stuff if you take the money. However, it is always the best idea to take money when it's available and have it at your disposal, create those banking relationships when you're healthy, financial, because when you're really, this is exactly what and now we've got this little exception. You can be in any state and the government's giving it to you. So my recommendation right now, and I'll tell you, I've done 3 things. My business, PPP, but pretty much put the money to the side, right? We know that whatever doesn't get granted through the payroll piece, anything else you get, it's a 1% loan, 1%. That's free money. I'll take $1 billion. Thank you very much. I'll take as much as you'll give me. So the answer is yes. And for idle, it's a little different. There's a very low grant opportunity. The rest is a direct SBA loan. For me, that completely went into an isolated account. It's a rainy day fund. I have a year that it can sit there. And if I don't need it, that money's going right back where it came from. But it only converts into a 3.75% loan. Also, for a business, that's a ridiculous interest rate. So yes, now my cautionary tale, know the TNCs and be comfortable with them. I have some very good friends who are not comfortable, particularly on the idle side.
So that point, there was a question that came in about what are your TNC concerns for idle, like specifically top two, top three.
You can't take bonuses, can't sell the company, there's some really interesting, you'll see some crazy loan documents. Those are the big ones. You got to be really, really careful of any kind of distributions that happen out of a company if you're sitting on an idle loan. They cannot come from those funds. Somebody said I should turn my video off. Maybe my audio is not coming through very well.
Yeah, maybe turn it off and turn it back on, or turn it off, talk for a little while. But yeah.
All right, I'll try it.
You may.
Yeah. People could just look at George.
I know. I guess I'm quasi.
Pretty guy.
So let's rewind real quick and go back to top 2 or 3 T's and C's. No distributions. Can't move the company. Can't sell the company. You can't take distributions out of idle money. What else?
Those are the key ones. I mean, you've got to be bonuses. There's certain things that you've got to be really careful. That goes back to PPP and payroll, right? Like, so leveraging PPP for payroll is exactly what it's meant to do. It's the payroll protection program. However, you can't do bonuses that aren't in the normal cadence. Like, don't create an audit issue with your PPP funds, as an example. If those are granted, you have a potential issue there.
So, let me ask you a question. Have you heard, I hate to go down too far down this rabbit hole, but since you're consulting with people, are you moving everything to another account? Are you doing any special accounting with these funds? Did you already have line of credit beforehand and that's running in parallel? Just trying to get an idea.
Yeah. So you'll hear different recommendations from different folks. I personally, with PPP, I treated it a little bit differently, PPP and idle. With PPP, I did not create a separate account. I'm very carefully documenting everything I'm using it on, absolutely paying payroll with it first, because that's its intent and that's where you maximize the grant component. You should have only been approved for PPP up to the amount that should roughly be, granted. And I'm ready for anything that's not granted to send the money back, right? Or I can keep it and pay the 1%, which is fine. So I might do that, but I'll make that decision. Everything about this is around properly accounting for and documenting every little thing you're doing with the PPP funds. Now, idle, I treated differently. Idle is the one that is a little more laden with T's and C's. The grant component separate from the loan component. Once you get the loan, that's not part of the grant. So I literally came as 2 deposits on the same day. Here's a couple $1,000 for your grant. Here's your loan, period. So the grant's fine. Grant's free money, done. Loan, the loan I did put in a completely separate checking account, and I'm not going to touch that unless I absolutely need it. I intend to send it back.
Fair enough.
I intend to send it back. I'm not going to play games. And really, the T's and C's do make me a little nervous. If I decided I wanted to take a big distribution out of my company or do something like that, I would first return the idle funds, and then I would do that.
Yeah, it's pretty important stuff. I didn't realize how deep they got into that, because a lot of people just apply for everything, right? And you see what happens, and sometimes they had to apply 3 times because of all of the back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to shift now into another category. What are the largest, like when you're approaching a company to consult, right? Hey, I'm here to come in and try and help you fix things from top down. What are the top 3 things that you see consistently that kind of hold people back from successfully, growing their businesses, moving forward, being a healthy company?
Yeah, so we focus on there's really 4 components. So I'll go from 3 to 4, right? And what I'm going to do is just kind of categorize. I'm going to kind of categorize how we view what it looks like. And I'm going to focus primarily on the smaller entrepreneurial company, but all of it matters in a larger company as well. But I'm going to focus on the smaller entrepreneurial company. First is most smaller entrepreneurial companies are primarily owned by a single entrepreneur, right? Maybe there's a partnership, that's fine, but you're not talking about publicly traded VC firm. I'm talking about this is somebody's livelihood, right?
Right. Somebody went out on the limb, started out of the trunk of their car and like built a business.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Something like that. And I think an underlying foundational piece that's missing for a lot of these people is clarity of the separation of their business as not being their livelihood, but being an asset that they own that is just helping them get to where they want to be in their life and legacy, right? So one of the things that we talk with our clients about is what are their life goals? What are they wanting out of their personal life? And then we can start to look at now, how does the business serve that? You and I know when you own a business, I get to choose who I work with. I get to choose I get to choose all these things. I built this to serve me, not the other way around, right? And so we really have to be intentional about getting clarity, because sometimes you just dig into the weeds with a business, and if you don't have clarity on where the owners stands, what they want out of their life and legacy and all those things, it's really hard to just dig into the business unless you get some clarity there. So that's number one. The rest are very specific to the organization. I'll try my video again and just see if it's working, but tell me if it's not, I'll turn it back off.
Okay.
So then I get back into starting into the business. It starts with vision. And for me, vision's really 3 components, right? Where are we going? Why are we going? And how are we going to behave along the way? So it's our BHAG 10-year, where are we going? Like everybody here knows this is the outcome we're shooting for, right? This is it. Why are we doing it is the most important and one of the most difficult to answer. I don't hear businesses do well. It's our purpose. Like, why are we here? Like what some people I like purpose better than mission. I really like the purpose.
Yeah, go ahead and shut that.
Mission,
go ahead
vision,
and
values.
shut that
I like
video off again. Yeah.
Dang. All right. So really like the word purpose over mission for that reason. And then values. How are we going to behave along the way? So purpose, vision, purpose, values. Those are critical. It's shocking to me how many. Well, it should be. I wouldn't say shocking. It's surprising to me how many companies do not have clarity on those, or it's just kind of been something they wrote on the day they started a company and never really.
The boilerplate for the pages on their website. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Great. It's on the website. Great. It's on the walls. Live it, breathe it. That's critical. A second component within the company is, how do you execute? What's your system for getting things done? This is where EOS like shines. That's the year and under the execution. What's our 1-year plan? What are our quarterly rocks? What are our weekly meetings look like? Like, how do we know what our scorecard is, what everybody's accountable for? That takes a level of maturity. I see too many small business owners who are primarily engineers who find themselves owning a business, they don't have MBAs from Harvard. And these systems, so you have the website up, but like EOS is built to it's like your pocket MBA. Like, how do I effectively run a business? And the execution component of EOS is very, very strong. And then,
so let me ask you this question. Do you find that business owners that's, basically bootstrapped it, right? They were, the 5 different hats, right? The CFO, the salesperson, the engineer, all that jazz. And then they start to actually they finally get movement, right? There's more people, the company's a little bit further down the line. but then they struggle to let go of control of certain areas, and that's what's creating a glass ceiling.
Oh, 100%. There's a lot of tools to help combat that, right? So there's glass ceilings, 10 people, right? The maximum amount of people you can hire and manage before they start to fall apart. You don't know how to hire somebody who's not billable because you don't have the money to do it. Like 10, this 8 to, how many MSPs have you seen that are between 8 and 12 employees, right? I mean, and it's not just MSPs, it's any kind of business. And there's a reason that it's that number. That's where an entrepreneur is hired. Maybe they get one non-billable person, everybody else is billable. They're kind of profitable, but to grow past that, now you need to start building leadership. New concept. Can't get past 10 people without leadership. Like I can single-handedly.
I've never actually heard that be the demarcation line.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there. The number of people an individual can effectively manage is usually in that 7, 8, 9, area. And that's where the wheels start to come off, right? If you don't be, and then you see MSPs start to accelerate past that. They've got an operations or service manager, somebody who's starting to lead and grow, who can start managing billable resources, and the owner can become more of a visionary and think about, sales and marketing and admin and finance, and not have to spend all their time in operations. So this is natural evolution that they do on their own organically, but it's usually not with intent, or they can look back and say, wow, I fell into this. It was kind of smart because it seems obvious. EOS provides that framework to say, what's everybody accountable for? How are we going to put systems in place to ensure that everybody's being held accountable? How do we begin to build leaders that can fill those gaps? And the word in EOS is letting go of the vine, which is just kind of what you said, right? Like that's what we talk about. You let go of the vine. Like if you create, another thing that we like to say is nature abhors a vacancy, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. So if you've built a leadership role and you've kind of elevated yourself out of that role, something is going to fill that role. You just need a lot of clarity.
So how do you know that you have somebody internally that can move up versus you have to go out of your organization and pull in?
Well, the two things that we look at, and I think it's really important to establish, first of all, across the board, everybody has to heavily align with core values. So number one, that's just, you have to have the right people on the bus, but then you have to have them in the right seat. So EOS uses gets it, wants it capacity to do it. So there's some pretty objective measurements to that. It's not purely subjective. We've got to be really, really clear on what does the role look like? What are the expectations? What is the role accountable for? And it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time for leadership teams to look at an individual and a given role and make the decision. Do they understand conceptually what it looks like to do that role well? Is this really what they want? Like, let's avoid the Peter principle, right? We don't want, the Peter principle. You take a salesperson, you put them in a sales manager role, and you just got a horrible sales manager and lost your best salesperson. Good job, right? That's the best example of the Peter principle. I'm aware of it. Happens all the time. So we want to avoid that. And then do they just have the natural skills and capacity to do the job? So I'm a huge proponent of hiring from within. I also believe in the mantra, what got you here won't get you there. So sometimes we do need to look outside if we get to certain points in business growth.
Fair enough. So, I think hiring is a very fickle beast for a lot of people, right? Because you only have so many questions during that, interviewing process. You don't know what you don't know until they're in it and how they mesh and gel. That first probationary period's pretty much a very trying time for everyone trying to figure out if this person's got the goods. Any top tip that comes to mind on hiring?
My top tip is when you've gotten very, very clear, and especially at a leadership team level, it's critical everywhere, but at a leadership team level, if you've properly instilled the right core values, and I'm going to lean more towards values than the role, like absolutely having somebody who walks the walk and talks the talk in terms of core values. And there's a lot of work you can do around that. But until your company's completely ingested and believes and rallies behind that, it's a very, very hard thing to do. So usually the failures I see in hiring a leader, it's less about their skill set. That's a resume, right? I mean, we know what they're capable of. We know what their experience is. The failures almost always come back to how they're going to work to complement the leadership team and make the company better. And it almost always comes back to core values. And people make exceptions because they think they get somebody has a bright resume or some great experience, and it's a monumental failure because they're not aligned with the values of the company, primarily the values of the owner. That is where the failures always mostly end up coming back to.
Top tip on trying to build and grow sales.
Build and grow sales. Well, I think I already said it. My top tip is I think you have to understand you have to be you have to have a great sales manager. Somebody needs to understand what it looks like to run sales. So my top tip is, if you're not one, and many business owners aren't a great sales manager, if you're not one, then outsource one. You can outsource fractional sales managers or hire one if you're a larger company and have the funds to do it. I'd also say your best salesperson is highly unlikely to be a good sales manager. That's the Peter principle I explained earlier. So you need to understand what the KPIs and metrics and expectations are. Don't make exceptions, keep them in line. Those are the main things that come to mind. Sales looks different right now, right? But we have quotas and metrics, and we know what people need to do for us to afford to keep them employed. So you've got to be very attentive and manage that well.
Top tip on marketing.
Marketing. So marketing is such a big term.
Big. I know.
So it's been interesting. Smileback, we did some interesting work where we really broke down marketing into like 5 different components that, they all lead into different things. What we realized is that we did a bit of a decentralization of our marketing efforts, where we have, focused on events. We were able to do this pretty well. What do we focused on events? We have somebody focused on social media, somebody focused on paid and SEO, somebody focused on, blog and web. So that ability to take, for us to really bifurcate what are these different specialties, and for us to afford to do each, because when we had one individual trying to do this in a relatively small company, we have like 17 employees at Smileback, right? So having a full-time marketing leader who really deeply understood how to run events and deeply understood the metrics around SEO and PPC doesn't really exist at a 16-person company level. It just doesn't. What we were able to do was outsource. So we have a leader running growth in the company, sales and marketing, running growth, manages sales, but we outsource those really deep components of like SEO, PPC, event management, primarily outsourced, which has been really effective in allowing us to get I'm a huge fan of outsourcing. Why? Because I ran an MSP for 20 years, which is what? Outsourcing, right? Right. So I believe in it really strong. We keep our core IP internal, absolutely. But we outsource things that we know we can't afford to do as well as somebody that might be external. And we do it very transparently. And I think we do a strong job with it, whether it's development, marketing, but marketing definitely we've pivoted to that being heavily falling in that area.
So there's a multi-layer strategy there. Since it sounds like a lot of your team's remote, I mean, just like we are here, top tip on making remote work.
Oh yeah. So I just one top tip. So let me just preface it by saying I'm in Las Vegas. Most of our teams in Berlin. We have folks in the Ukraine. We have folks in Canada. We have folks in the United Kingdom. Smileback is extremely decentralized. But we do have a central office in Berlin where most people, and where we do come together, right? It has been, walking into coronavirus has been pretty painless. And most of the tips I would have given pre-coronavirus, I don't mean painless. I mean painless in terms of nobody being able to go in the office painless. We were ready. We happen to leverage, I see two camps. There's the Microsoft camp and the non-Microsoft camp. Smileback's a weird blend of the two, but we do use Slack and Zoom. So we've created some effective things to really connect with each other remotely and keep our culture engaged. So I think my top tip is, when we engage, and this used to not be a thing, video always on. Now it's kind of a foregone conclusion, video always on, as I break my rule because it seems to be breaking my audio right now. Video always on. The other thing is leverage, don't stop meeting up in the way you would in person anyway, but use Zoom to do it. We have somebody exiting tomorrow, a longtime employee who's, and he's, we're doing a happy hour for an hour and a half, and everybody's on Zoom for the happy hour. We've had a magician come in. We've had stretches, morning stretches. We've done all kinds of really cool stuff, and we connect. Actually, I would say our culture and our values have even been better represented. What coronavirus kind of forced the issue, and we were so ready for it. We were like, let's amp up all those things we've been talking about doing, and we just did it virtually. It's been great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, listen, over communicate. I've said it a billion times, I feel like, but over communication is key to working remote, and especially when everyone's like, you can't. Oh, hey, let's just meet up down the street and we'll have a beer. Like that's not going to happen now, right?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. If you weren't already heavily using Teams or Slack, all the beauty of those is that it can be real time or it can be completely, so that is it's been really nice to be able to leverage Zoom or Teams to be able to chat face to face, but then leverage Slack or Teams to be able to have those types of systems. We've also implemented, there's a couple cool tools out there to really collaborate virtually. So there's some really interesting solutions out there that I would take a look at it. We're using a product called Miro at Smileback, and at ConnectStrat, we're using Mural, M-U-R-A-L. They're almost identical platforms. We chose slightly different ones in each organization, but those have been very powerful as well.
So, kind of in the final stretch here, I know ConnectStrat, right? Going back to company one, right? 3 different companies kind of been hovering through the 3. So ConnectStrat's core purpose is to, help people adopt EOS. And for people who don't know EOS, entrepreneurs operating system, Google it. There's tons and tons and tons of content on this. What would you like? Does this fit every organization, any size? Who would you recommend looking at it?
Yeah, I think what happened, it makes sense to leverage EOS at any size. I mean, there's probably a top size at 500 employees or something where it doesn't, but way outside of our conversation. I usually see that people are ready for EOS when they're at 9, 10, 11 folks or up. At 9, 10, or 11, and they want to break through the ceiling. They're struggling to get the right leadership, but get consistent systems. They're frustrated because the system, it's just not performing the way they want. They maybe haven't built a leadership team before. They don't know how to put metrics in place. And they're ready to take it to the next level. So our clients range from 10 to about 150 employees, but we really see that really nice entry point at 10 or 15 employees that are trying to move up. We focus, I'd mentioned it before, on 4 components. We talk about life and legacy with the owner. EOS really helps us with the vision and execution component. And then we leverage some other exercise around strategy, which I haven't talked about a lot, but it's really the connective tissue between the long range vision and the 1-year execution. It's kind of that 3-year, what are we going to do to think of blue ocean strategy or what have you? What are we going to do to differentiate over the next few years? A really critical component in these times.
I'm sure that this whole process has maybe changed that 1, 2, 3 year situation.
Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of people are calling you back up saying, hey, how do I change this?
No, what's funny is, it's a march. It takes time. We don't want people to waver way off. What really changed primarily is people had quarterly rocks, and their Q2 rocks were like, well, so much with that, those changed pretty dramatically. And we made there were a few people had exceptions that were reasonable on their, but we don't want to ignore the work we've done around strategy. We may add some additional work to strategy and say, hey, we really feel like a couple of years from now, this is how the environment's going to look different, but we also don't want to be reactive to a two month crazy, right? Like, do we feel like we've accelerated the need for cloud-based serverless, yes, absolutely. Right. Like anybody who'd say no to that, I would question. So, hey, did our strategy include differentiation or at least adoption of services that are going to support that future? Good. If not, let's look at that and modify the strategy to address it.
Fair enough. So I've already put your website out there so people can reach you at connectstrat.com. You're on all the platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, now, I guess. You expecting to be at an event anytime for now and the end of the year, or we're going to be just doing a whole lot more virtual here?
So I'm the speaker on this exact topic at IT Nation Explore. I was slated to be the speaker on this topic at DattoCon, which is in flux. I'm talking with IT by Design about speaking at their event, which is also a little bit in flux. And then I'll also be the speaker at IT Nation Connect, which is pretty bullish about that one happening.
You're thinking it's definitely happening.
Well, the messaging so far seems pretty consistent, but I don't know if I got nothing to do with it, but the messaging I'm hearing is that they're pretty bullish about hopeful, maybe hopeful is a better word, but pretty bullish about Connect. That's a long ways off. Explores in a couple of weeks, right? So 4-day virtual session, pretty excited about that one.
Fair enough. Appreciate you coming on. Sorry for the audio stuff. Like, hey, nobody's perfect, even too. So at the end of the day, I really appreciate you kind of sharing some of the love. I know I threw like a lot of different momentum moves there during the call. I try and do my best to get information out that seems to be popular during the time. So, I think I'll see you soon. I mean, I'm sure we're always going back and forth. And for everyone else who was on came on today, I appreciate you coming on. This was recorded. This will be on mspinitiative.com shortly thereafter. Again, we do these twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, even though I keep on forgetting what day of the week it is because they're all blending together. And I hope everybody's getting a little bit more fresh air as the weather's kind of starting to get good everywhere. Hopefully, unless you're in a really cold area. Jameson, wish you the best of luck. Well, I'm sure we'll talk soon. And stay tuned for the next episode, Tuesday, coming up, 1:00.
Awesome. Thanks, George. Appreciate it.
See ya.